It is my pleasure today to host as part of the Australian Society of Exploration Geophysicists in the Canberra or the Australian Capital Territory branch, Dr. Audrey Addison, who will tell us about her misadventures as a mathematician in the industry. And before I go on to introduce Audrey in a little more detail, I'll just get some housekeeping slides out of the way. We would, at the ASEG, like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today, and also on the many lands on which we undertake all our work, whether it be on the field, collecting data, or in our offices. We recognize their continuing connection to these lands, water, and culture, and pay our respect to their elders past and present, both in Australia as well as in the United States, where Audrey is speaking from. Well, we couldn't organize any of these events without our corporate members, so a big shout out and thank you to all of them. There's also these in-person events, which are very valuable if you're trying to network and get to know other people, as well as figure out who to talk to for a particular technical problem or other such issues that you might have. So these in-person events are sponsored by these people. So again, a thank you to them. So I would encourage you to ask your questions using the Q&A button, but very often we find that there's a lively discussion going on. So don't let me stop you from doing that. If you want to have discussions in the chat, we do have someone, Phil Wynn, who is the incoming incoming president of the ACT branch, who is also monitoring the chat for us. Thank you, Phil. Next week, we have Tom Raymond from Down Under Geophysics, or Geosolutions, Geoimaging, Doug, talk about multi-parameter FWI, so be sure to tune in for that one. And there's a whole lot of benefits to being an ASEG member. And if you're a student, it's a no-brainer. You should be joining because you get all of these benefits. You get chances to go to conferences at subsidized rates. So it's really great. I'll let you read all of these member benefits. And there's a whole lot of ways that you can keep in touch with us on social media. And now let me introduce Audrey a little more formally, or perhaps informally. So Audrey, as all of you have probably read to do with her bio that was sent out, she's held all kinds of responsibility throughout her career. First and foremost, she's a mathematician. She was also a rescue coordination center controller with the US Air Force. She was also an intelligence officer for the US. She then transitioned to civilian life as a research geophysicist at Chevron. Then she was a numerical analysis software engineer at Siemens. And then she has now made her way to Google as a software engineer. So that's a very varied career. And as you can see, it's at all of these very well-known institutions throughout the world. And so she's absolutely brilliant. But on a more personal note, I came across Audrey at Chevron R&D, where she was working on interpreted seismic imaging. And I was working on waveform inversion. But somehow we both ended up working on direct hydrocarbon inference from seismic data. Now, interestingly, we faced a bit of an ethical dilemma because we needed to carry out the statistical engineering and software development for an established method, which didn't quite work as we expected. Now, here's the thing. Audrey figured out what it was really doing, and only then was I able to put it in a statistical framework to show that it was quite biased. And that's not something you want to be when you're assessing subsurface volumes for hydrocarbons. I mentioned this because it was a very difficult predicament. This was, oh gosh, it was nearly 8 or 9 years ago now, at US $40 oil per barrel. This project, which wasn't providing the best assessment of the subsurface, was funding our team. So, it was, so when you're getting funded by a project, how do you kind of say that, well, it's not quite doing what we expected to, but happily, the management accepted our conclusions. And this was a first step towards a fix, which worked far better than the original and could be easily integrated with the existing suite of subsurface tools that we had. So if you're looking for a first-class analytical mind, a mathematician, a software developer, a person with integrity, and someone who has a gift, really a gift for explaining complicated things to non-specialists with lived leadership experience, well then Audrey is your person. Also, did I mention that she is a dog whisperer? And on that note, I'll stop sharing my screen and I will hand over to Audrey.
Hey, thank you. Let me share my screen. But thank you for that intro, Anand. Yeah, you're still one of my favorite coworkers of all times. And I do remember that particular day we were looking at the code and finally figured it out and then said, what do we do now? But I'm glad that's behind us. Although I've had to do that kind of thing time and again since then. Okay, so everyone hopefully can see my slides now. My talk today is called Misadventures of a Mathematician in Industry. And as Anand said, my name is Audrey Addison, and I will be talking about my career. And by misadventures, I just want to kind of say that that means I'm admitting that I've bounced around with no grand plan. I didn't have a dream of becoming a certain kind of scientist and, was following this plan that was laid out. Instead, I've just kind of put one foot in front of the other and followed my nose, and this is what's happened. So I'm hoping that the talk has some things that are interesting and possibly helpful if you're newer in your career. And if you're further along in your career, I'm hoping that it's just relatively entertaining. And I think, I'm a mathematician, but I think you can kind of look at my career and see it as what a STEM career can look like if you're not hyper-focused on one thing. So I'll just be talking about my background, like how I got where I am, and then things that I've learned over time that might be helpful to others, what I've learned along the way, what's helped me, myths and misconceptions about what a scientist does, challenges I've faced, and some takeaways. So just at a really high level view, I have a bachelor's, master's, and PhD in mathematics. I also decided that wasn't enough, and I went back and took 7 more classes towards a master's in software engineering. I'm a 14-year veteran of the US Armed Forces, and I've worked for 8 years as a scientist across 3 different industries: oil and gas, as Anand was saying, industrial engineering, and now tech. But if I back up and I try to think about how I got where I am, it kind of all starts, I guess, with a career test I took in 7th grade, where it was a computer-based test, but not connected to the internet. I don't even know what kind of questions it asked, but it was supposed to suggest a career to you. And I think the guys in the class got suggestions like fireman and police officer and lawyer. And the only suggestion it gave me was daycare worker. So that kind of missed the mark. And then throughout high school, I didn't get any career counseling. So when I graduated from high school, I knew I wanted to go to college, but I didn't know what to do. I knew what my parents did, and I knew I didn't want to do that. So I thought, well, should I study math? I've always been good at math. I ended up doing that, and specifically because when I was a senior, I took an advanced placement calculus exam. And in America, when you take an advanced placement course, this is like a kind of more difficult course, and then you take a formal exam at the end called the advanced placement exam. And if you get a score of a 3, 4, or 5, you can get college credit for that, which is good because we pay for college and it's expensive. So getting some free credits is always helpful. And I ended up getting a 5 on this exam, and a 5 was the best score you could get. And no one was more surprised than I was, except possibly my high school math teacher. But there it was, I got a 5, and it was external validation that I was good at math. So I said, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. I thought about studying computer science because it seemed kind of sensible at the time, but this was before Google was even a thing. I don't know why I thought I would do it. I think that the requirements for the degree overlapped really heavily with math. So I tried it out. I took 1 class. It was a horrible fit. I was out of place. I was the only female in the class. It was awkward, just bad experience. So I said, nope, only studying math. So this was at the University of Alaska Anchorage, my local university. At the same time, I realized school was expensive. And to remedy that, I decided to join the military. So I enlisted as a command post controller in March 2001. And in America, we have the National Guard. And so this is a 1 weekend a month, 2-week commitment. You'll see recruiting commercials for it. This was before September 11th, 2001. So it was before we had gone on to this forever war. And so they convinced me that it was a good deal. They went to Japan for their 2 weeks a year, and it was just a fun time, and I should do it. And I said, okay. So I enlisted as a command post controller, and this was where I was like the eyes and ears of the base commander. If anything was happening around the base or with any of our aircraft or any of the people who were assigned to the base, I was supposed to know about it so I could brief the commander when he came in. This took me out of my comfort zone. I was very shy, but I had to learn to talk to people. I was always on the phone or the radio, you know, talking to security forces or the maintenance people who were working on the aircraft or the airplanes who were calling from around the world, and then talking to the commander. So it really took me out of my comfort zone. And in addition, the job was very checklist and procedure focused. There were literally checklists for everything. So, you know, these two things I kind of credit with really changing my trajectory in life. Like being able to learn to talk to people and get over my shyness was a big deal. And then learning a regimented way of thinking about things and going from point A to point B has been something that's helped me again and again. So I did that for 2 years. And then I moved to the Rescue Coordination Center in 2003. And I coordinated search and rescue across the state of Alaska. That Rescue Coordination Center exists to provide search and rescue support for downed fighter aircraft. There's fighter aircraft that patrol the skies around Alaska in case of like an incursion by foreign aircraft. And we are there in case they crash, but we're also there in case civilian aircraft crash or if there's hunters or hikers in distress. So this job was like in a bunker underground, and I just sat there with lots of phones and radios and satellite feeds coming in. And it was long periods of boredom followed by moments of sheer panic if something actually happened and we needed to coordinate a rescue. It was a great job when I was a student because during the boredom times, I could do my homework or I could study for tests. But after I graduated, I didn't quite have enough to do to stay entertained. So overall, though, I liked the military. There was lots of opportunity for career advancement, opportunity to move around to different kinds of roles, and opportunity to move up. So I sought a commission as an intelligence officer. I went back to officer basic training. I did a 7-month school teaching me how to become an intelligence officer. And then I returned back to Alaska as a second lieutenant. And remember, you know, the story as I joined was that we don't deploy involuntarily, but when I came back, they ended up deploying me 3 times in a year. One of those trips was kind of a good deal trip. It was called Operation Joint Forge, and it was mostly to Germany with a quick flight in and out of Kosovo for part of peacekeeping operations. And then I deployed twice for Operation Enduring Freedom, once to Djibouti on the Horn of Africa. This is a small Pac-Man shaped country that's in the map at the top right of the slide, and it's next to Somalia and Eritrea. And we were there to provide search and rescue support. I was there with our HC-130 Hercules aircraft, and we were there to refuel these Marine helicopters and then provide search and rescue support in case something happened in the Horn of Africa. And these are actually photos from when I was there. And fun fact, I'm sitting in the back of that C-130 right there. The tailgate is open, and we were watching this helicopter try to insert their refueling probe into those baskets that are trailing behind the HC-130, refueling them in flight. And this pilot had not gotten to practice this before, so it was very challenging and very interesting to watch. I also spent 4 months in Afghanistan, and this was providing support to HH-60 Pavehawk helicopters. We were there for search and rescue support and medevacs in Regional Command East, so that's the rightmost part of the country. And my job there was to just monitor all the happenings, if there were troops in contact with enemies, if there were aircraft being fired at by small arms or any other kinds of weapons, and just what was going on so that the helicopters would know what the dangerous areas were when they flew, and also what areas they might be more likely to be called out on a rescue. So it was really interesting, rewarding, and challenging work. But if I stayed as trying to make intelligence officer my full-time job, I was going to be back in Afghanistan for 4 months every year, kind of indefinitely. So I decided it was time for a life change, and I went back to graduate school. So I was hit with the question again, what do I do with my life? Intelligence officer doesn't obviously translate to a civilian role, at least not in Alaska. I enjoyed the work, but I mostly enjoyed just having to learn new things all the time. So, I was again stuck with my decisions as far as getting a math degree in undergrad. What do I do with this bachelor's in mathematics? If I'd studied engineering, I could be an engineer. If I'd studied nursing, I could be a nurse, but I studied math, so I could be a math. I just didn't know what to do, but I decided the only logical thing was to keep studying math. I mean, clearly that wasn't true, but that's what I did. So I ended up going to Utah State University. I chose the school because my advisor kind of interested me, and it was just a relatively small school in a mountain town, and it looked fun. I meant to just get a master's degree, thinking that I would learn what a mathematician could do in industry in those next 2 years. That didn't happen. I, took classes that continued to be mostly pure theory. And then when I graduated, there was the financial crisis. So there were no jobs to be had. So I decided to stay for the PhD in mathematics. I ended up getting a PhD in math biology. I studied a multipartite symbiosis between the mountain pine beetle and 2 species of fungi. They were called blue stain fungi at the time because they created blue staining in a tree. And so you can see this cross section of a tree where the fungi has kind of colonized into the wood. And if you ever see maybe furniture made in Canada, you might see this blue staining going through different pine furniture. But I studied this symbiosis, and the goal was to model the growth of the fungus as a function of temperature and combine it with models for the mountain pine beetle's development. And so the interesting thing is that there was 2 species of fungi. Normally there's just one in a symbiosis. And so it was strange that one hadn't outcompeted the other. And we were interested in what was going to happen with different climate change regimes. Would one of the fungus outcompete the other, or would they both end up dying and the beetle be left without a symbiont? So that's what we did. Just for the description of these photos, that's the mountain pine beetle. And next to it is a picture of a tree trunk with these little beige fuzzy things. And what that means is that beetles drilled their way into the tree, and then the tree is trying to fight them off by forcing this sap around them, either to force them out of the tree or just to encase them and kill them. But if the beetles attack the tree in great enough numbers all at once, they will overwhelm the tree's defenses. And they carry these, they have these appendages on their head called mycangia. And when they attack a tree, they're going to burrow a little J-shaped gallery, which is the picture on the top right. And they're going to be laying eggs. And at the same time, they have fungal spores that they keep in their mycangia, and they're depositing those along the tree. And so over the course of the winter, the eggs are going to hatch. They're going to go through their different larval stages, eventually becoming a pupa and then a teneral adult. And then they're going to crawl around. And at the same time, the fungus will have been growing. And so they're going to feed on this fungal colonized phloem, and that helps them reach sexual maturity. They'll pack their mycangia with whatever fungus is available, and then they'll go attack the next tree, essentially packing their lunch and bringing it with them. So this was the system that I studied, and it's a big deal in America and in Canada. It affects a lot of trees in the whole Western North America. So as interesting as that was, after 10 years of math education, I still really had no job prospects. I wanted to be a college professor, and as a mathematician, that is pretty reasonable. I have a lot of friends from graduate school who are now math professors, but my partner was getting a PhD in physics at the same time. And so to get a professor position in mathematics and in physics at the same school is much more difficult. There's not as many physics professor positions. They don't teach as many classes, and to find them in the same zip code, very unlikely. So I started thinking about what I could do in industry. I had a friend who was getting a PhD who was 1 year ahead of me. And he went to a national lab for an internship his final year, and this turned into a full-time job. And so he said, get an internship ASAP. Side note, math students don't generally do internships. So I tried for it, but I didn't have any luck. I couldn't find internships really outside of things focusing on college sophomores. No one wanted to hire someone really late in their PhD in mathematics math biology of all things. But luckily, my husband had some luck. We had seen an advertisement for ExxonMobil coming and talking to the geosciences department, but there were not enough geophysics students there, and they were looking for people who could do signal processing. So they ended up advertising in the math department, and my husband had an electrical engineering background. So I said, you need to go and interview, and he ended up getting an internship. And you know, the offer was very lucrative. We went to Houston and it seemed fine enough. So I said, okay, what can I do in Houston? So in Houston for math, it looked like the options were math biology, you know, for medical applications, financial math being an actuary or a quant, or geophysics. So for whatever reason, I decided geophysics was my best bet. I networked like crazy. I also studied up on what I could. I sent a bunch of LinkedIn premium InMails because I was a veteran. They gave me a free premium membership, and I could send these InMails to people who had math backgrounds and jobs and asking them how did they bridge the gap. And surprisingly, people were very nice. And, you know, something like half of the people I reached out to wrote back with really long, detailed messages about how they made the switch. And most of them said something about learn how to code, because the way that math is used is it's in code. So I was learning how to code. I also went to ASEG. I went to regional petroleum conferences, and finally I got an interview with Chevron. It was kind of a strange thing. Chevron likes to hire spouses, and I didn't understand this at the time, but they interviewed my husband, and because he had an internship at Exxon that was probably going to turn into a full-time offer, then Chevron was interested in him. And they like to hear out whether the spouse was qualified to also work there. I think so that they could send you to different parts of the world as a package, and it helped with like people staying there long term. So my interview was very strange. It says, we know how your husband would fit in, but we're not so sure about you. We have a team that does X. Sell yourself on it. Go. We have a team that does Y. Sell yourself on it. Go. And it went on for close to an hour. And there was actually a guy transcribing everything that I said. And so at the end of that, both he and I are sweating, and, you know, my leg is shaking and I'm so nervous and overwhelmed. But I must have been convincing. I got a job, and it turned out that interviewer was my first boss. So I went to work at Chevron as a research geophysicist. And my first role was being a steward of tools and technologies. And this forced me to really lean into software and learn it. I was the subject matter expert for time to depth conversion, and I maintained a time to depth conversion software that had been written at Chevron and was still being used, mostly for kind of lower budget land seismic projects, to create velocity models for converting time collected data to depth. And then, you know, as I did that, I was able to learn more of the terms, you know, terms and tools that geophysics used, and find out how to kind of communicate what I knew as a mathematician to things that geophysicists cared about. And I was able to, you know, expand to different types of projects. I was able to do a pretty fun research project where we tried to apply computer graphics techniques to try and model salt diapirs. So most of the existing tools that we were using could only represent surfaces with single Z. So it would just be a series of points, X, Y, Z. And if that surface kind of wrapped under itself and back, then the tools would generally fail. And so a salt diapir could be really complicated. And in practice, when they model it, they have to model it with like a top of salt and a base of salt. Or if it's complicated, there might be top of salt 1, base of salt 1, top of salt 2, base of salt 2. And then they have to kind of sew those together and be very careful that when they triangulate these surfaces, that the triangles all work out and there's no leaks. Because otherwise, if you're trying to assign a property to do migration, and you try to say the velocity of the salt, and if there's a leak, then it will say that you have salt outside of that shape that you intended as well, and it will mess up your migration results. So I was trying to apply some computer graphics techniques, namely the isosurfaces to that, and that was fun and interesting. And we had some luck, but the economics at the time were not able to like support moving forward on that. I also worked on a lot of earth modeling plugins, mostly focused on manipulating triangulated surfaces or performing conversions on seismic data. I worked on some reservoir properties from seismic, projects like the one Anand was mentioning, and also moved towards productionizing migration algorithms at the end of my time at Chevron. So I was there for nearly 4 years. As an Alaskan though, Houston, Texas is awfully hot and did not have the kind of outdoor opportunities that I wanted for my life. The culture, especially being oil downturn with lots of layoffs, it just wasn't the place for me, and I wanted to move on and do something different. So my husband got a job at Google and I got a job at Siemens, and we moved to the Pacific Northwest. So when I say Siemens, Siemens is like 300,000 people, but I was really hired into a tiny company that had been purchased by Siemens called CD Adapco. And they have a multi-physics simulation software called Star CCM Plus. And so I became a numerical analysis software engineer at Siemens. And this is a software that is used to run multi-physics simulations on models for like cars or aircraft or engines. It can simulate icing on a window, icing on the wing of an aircraft, the heating up of an engine, all sorts of things. And my role was on the post-processing team. So kind of like in geophysics, where we have these models that represent the subsurface, we had models that represented these physical things that would be built, and they were still in the design stage. And then the simulations that we would perform could kind of test out different designs and see whether there were going to be problems with something heating up too much or having too much pressure at a certain place, or just not performing as efficiently as expected. And so you would create a model for something, and then the person using the software would tell the software what materials different parts of the model were made of, and then they would give it different physics governing equations, and then it would do some numerical solving to get properties at different time steps. And so my team was focused on taking these millions of values for different properties on all the different nodes in the model at all the different time steps. And first of all, making sure that they were populated correctly in the software, and then trying to allow the user to get some insights from them by either plotting things on the model or by summarizing results in tables or reports. I also worked on something called turbo machinery averaging. And so turbo machines are kind of a special kind of engine, like a turbine engine. And there are turbo machinery analysts who like to analyze simulations on these turbo machines in a very specific way. And so this involved a lot of coordinate transformations where we went from XYZ to specific turbo machinery coordinates, axial, radial, and meridional. And then we computed averages and plotted them on like the fan blades in a very certain way so that the turbo machinery analysts could learn from them. I worked there for about 1.5 years, and then I decided to try my hand at going to Google. So I've been at Google now for about 2.5 years. I'm a senior software engineer. Google also has research scientists, but there are quite a few PhD scientists who work as software engineers. I was in the research org for about 2.5 years, and my job, really straddled software engineering to research science. So I worked on the speech intelligence team, and I was working on speaker diarization, or detecting changes in a speaker. So this is where we would have an audio recording for a meeting and several people speaking, and we might want to break apart the transcript in a meaningful way, like at least detecting when the speaker had changed so we could put in a line break, or if possible, understanding, who spoke when and labeling it. And so we were using some different tools. One of them were embeddings that were computed by an LSTM neural network. And the embeddings were supposed to encode properties of a speaker's voice. And the idea, and this plot on the right is kind of a different type of embedding vector, but you can cluster these embedding vectors to understand whether they come from one speaker or another speaker, if they're done well. And then we also were trying to use sound source localization and looking at the time delay of arrival of sound to the different microphones to detect when the speaker changed. And then a big part of what I've done on that team is just focusing on model quality and evaluating how well we're doing for certain use cases. and kind of reporting that up. I recently moved to the Geo org, and I'm working on embeddings again, but this time for roads, working with machine learning models again. And again, very, very focused on model quality. So it's really easy to make a model for something, but it takes quite a bit of time to make sure that that model is doing something useful for you. So that's what I tend to focus on. And on my new team, I'm adjacent to the routing platform where the actual solver is that decides how you're going to get from point A to point B. And our goal is to work on improving arrival time estimates. But it's kind of nice, like a nice warm fuzzy feeling for me as a mathematician to be back sort of adjacent to the numerical solver. I'm not working on it, but it reminds me of my math PhD work. It reminds me of my time at Chevron near the migration work where they're solving the two-way wave equation. And it reminds me of my work at Siemens where they were solving different physical equations. So it's kind of fun to be back and working on applications. Geo also has a lot of representations for the Earth that remind me a lot of the work that I did at Chevron for representing Earth models. So that's kind of my career. That's how I've gotten from where I was to where I am now. And I'll say that in my day-to-day life, my basic work across all the companies has ended up being very similar. I generally work adjacent to some mathematical problem, and then I incrementally work to improve modeling or software through changing code or developing a deeper understanding of what the software is doing or how it's doing it so I can guide changes to the code. The biggest differences between the companies really relate to either the pace of work, the kind of deliverables that I'm expected to produce, whether ideas come from the top down or bottom up, and who I communicate with, how and why. And this all just relates to company culture. I'll say that at Chevron and Siemens, the pace of work was quite a bit slower than it is at Google. The deliverables at Chevron and Siemens were kind of more just if someone asked me to make a change to the code and then I made that change to the code. At Google, I feel like the pace of work is just faster. I think more people depend on me for some reason. The deliverables, more time goes into kind of documenting what I'm working on. And I think that's partly because ideas tend to come from the bottom up at Google versus top down at Chevron and Siemens. And so at those two companies, if there was a decision to move forward and work on something, it was just solved. Like, yes, we're going to work on this, we're going to move forward. Whereas at Google, we have a lot of freedom to work on what we want, but we have to continually justify why what we're spending our time on is the best thing. And so we end up having to talk to a lot more people and produce a lot more artifacts to kind of share with people as to why what we're working on is important. So that's a pretty big cultural difference between the companies. But otherwise, my nuts and bolts day-to-day life is really pretty similar. So what have I learned along the way? Well, I've picked up quite a few technical skills, math, building, debugging, and reading code, reading technical papers, learning new terminology, finding ideas for metrics or different things to implement. And as geoscientists, I'm sure that this is something that you're adept at. For me personally, recurring themes in my three positions are dealing with different data structures like point clouds and polylines and cubes, the underlying representations for the Earth models, or the models used to represent a turbomachinery engine, or now with roads. I look at predictions versus observations a lot, looking at metrics a lot, looking at mathematical transformations. So a lot of my work is just low level, lots of troubleshooting, looking at assumptions. Did we satisfy those assumptions? And then creating figures or presentations to communicate ideas. So these are all things that I've gotten pretty adept at, and those are the technical skills. But on the soft skills side, I think soft skills can be just as important. So I've picked up different soft skills along the way, and really between all the different positions, they've luckily overlapped a lot and just built upon each other. In the military, focusing on communication was really important, where I communicated with all different types of people from all different backgrounds with all different focuses. Like I might talk to the security forces or the maintenance personnel, or someone who's calling in saying they need help and they need to be rescued, or I'd be talking to the general. Worked on public speaking, rapidly becoming a subject matter expert as an intelligence officer going into different countries, being organized and methodical. And I also learned this tidbit of advice, which is something that they echoed again and again in the military, that nobody loves you like you love you, meaning that if you want something, you need to advocate for yourself. And it might be obvious, but it might not have been something I would have thought about had it not been repeated so many times. So this is something that I just remember all the time. If I want something, I have to tell people I want it and I have to go for it and just advocate for myself. In grad school, I was able to build upon the skills from the military, worked at communication even more, this time at different levels of detail where, you know, not everyone needed to know all the technical details of my PhD work, but maybe they needed to know some of it if I was trying to get help, or if I was teaching students, they wanted to know only what they needed to know and nothing more. More public speaking, more problem solving, time management. You don't get through graduate school without time management. Study skills, technical writing, and a lot of data analysis. At Chevron, I just kind of continued to build on this. So while it was really difficult to make the switch from graduate school and the military to Chevron, once I was there, I had a lot of skills and I was able to just hone those skills and become a credible contributor. And then this really helped me as I went from one job to the next. I was able to just build on these skills, and I was no longer kind of the dark horse candidate for a job because I was able to communicate why what I knew was useful. So we worked on more communication at Chevron, the right story for the right person, the importance of an elevator pitch if you're trying to get someone to support you on something or to understand who you were and why it mattered. More problem solving. So as an outsider, I had to learn to take my existing knowledge, find out what was relevant to a new domain. Luckily, between mathematics and geophysics, a lot of the barrier was just terminology. There might be a lot of calculus concepts that I knew, and in geophysics, they were called something else. So that was helpful to just learn the new terminology and then find out that I wasn't as lost as it seemed at first. Understanding where we were with the problem and where we wanted to go, and then being able to break a complicated problem into the smallest possible subproblems and work up. And I am very systematic, and I think I'm systematic from all my years in the military and the checklist-based approach and just being really regimented. And this has helped me as I solve complicated problems. I got more hands-on software development at Chevron, working on plugins to different Earth modeling software like GoCAD and Petrel, working on a medium-sized standalone application, I think on the order of a couple 100,000 lines of C++ code. And I got lots of examples of real-world mathematics use cases, which was pretty great because all through grad school, most professors couldn't give me real-world use cases for anything. Moving to Siemens, you know, I was able to communicate my way into that, talking about a lot of the software tools that I'd worked on at Chevron. A lot of the modeling aspects and the troubleshooting and the problem solving were very relevant. Moved on to learning some project management at the team level at Siemens. Suddenly people, you know, were depending on me a little more than when I was at Chevron. Sometimes I called my office at Chevron my tower of loneliness because I may not talk to anyone all day. But at Siemens, there was a little more interaction. The software was much bigger. It was about 10 million lines of C++ with 200 developers contributing all the time. And to build the code, it took something like 4 hours. And there were constant changes. So it was a growth opportunity to learn that. And there were more examples of real world mathematic use cases. Moving to Google, communication continued to be important. Here, it's more about communicating what you have done and why it's important, because we get to choose what we spend our time on. So justifying why you're spending your time on something is really important. Problem solving skills just continue along. Project management continues, but now it's kind of at the team, cross-team or cross-org level. So getting a little bigger where we're taking an idea, gathering information, getting stakeholder engagement, outlining tasks, milestones, and deliverables. And I bet a lot of these things are things that you guys do in your work. More software development, obviously, and then even more examples of real world mathematic use cases. So you can see that as I've crossed between companies, it's not necessarily new things that I'm doing, it's just getting better at the same things. So this transferable skills really just all boil down to the same handful of things. What helped me? So now I'm kind of an oddball as a scientist in industry. I didn't want to go deep in a single field. I got kind of bored, frankly. So because I'm not the obvious expert in a certain topic, then sometimes I have to be flexible as far as what projects I take on. So I've just always chosen to take every task or job as it comes as an experience to learn from. And on the flip side, I get really excited about each new domain. There's, a period where I'm like a giddy grad student again, and I'm learning everything about geophysics or everything about earth modeling or everything about computational fluid dynamics or speech. And it's very fun for quite a while. So just being able to motivate myself to just learn and devour papers and books and talk to people. Mentors are also really helpful. I did not understand mentors until I started at Chevron. And in hindsight, I had basically the best technical mentor ever at Chevron and really good technical mentorship at Siemens. And so if your company offers this, I would say really lean into it, because it can really just jumpstart your productivity in something. You can ask questions and really just get proficient really quickly. Google's kind of more into social mentors, and so social mentors can help too. One thing I've learned over time is that being good at your job isn't enough. You need others to know you're good at your job. And so social mentors can help you kind of navigate the company culture and find out how to document, whether you're doing your job in an adequate way and helping other people recognize your contributions. But with mentors, the experience is what you make of it. So I think a best practice is to always come prepared with questions, goals, and areas where you want to grow. Myths and misperceptions about what a scientist does. So you guys probably have ideas about what a scientist does. I, as a young person, could not have ever imagined myself as working as a scientist, because I thought of a scientist in a very certain way. So the myths and misperceptions that I've seen, we don't all wear lab coats and do physical experiments. We don't all write academic papers, though lots do. We don't all generate patents, though lots do. We don't all go by the name scientist. We can have lots of different job titles. Some of us are hyper-focused in one area, and then some of us want to work on the latest cutting edge idea, but some of us are not so hyper-focused, and we like to move around. So that's me, and I'm not so interested in one area forever. I'm not so interested in being on the latest cutting edge fad. So I'm content to work on just the less flashy nuts and bolts work. And it turns out that a lot of companies need this. And so I think you can easily carve a niche if that's what you want to do. Challenges I've faced, adjusting to various company cultures, especially as a female, has taken a lot of work and a lot of, pulling my hair out and talking to people and soul searching. There's different expectations for how you act, especially as a female, when you're in different slices of society. So in the military, how I was expected to act is very different than how I was expected to act at Chevron, how I was expected to act at Google. There's been times when I've been accused of not being direct enough. And then on the flip side, suddenly I'm too direct. Sometimes I'm the only female in a room, often I am, or the only female in an org, that's happened. But then sometimes at Google, I might be in a room with only females. And so it's taken a lot of work to learn how to communicate in a way that's authentic to myself, that's not going to come across too brash, because that is something that other people really have a problem with if I come across too direct. But I need to be direct too, because I have to advocate for myself. I have to be able to be myself and ask for what I need and speak up. So it's been a lot of trying to learn how to balance all of that. Not keeping up with the Joneses. So I have to understand that what my peers want may not be what I want. So again, I've got coworkers who might be really focused on promotion. They might want to become the CEO of a company, or I've got coworkers who are really focused on getting their publication into the latest big conference, or this journal or that journal. And so just understanding that what my coworkers want or my peers want may not be what I want, and then understanding how to navigate that and what I do want. Handling the bad times, or staying relevant. So if I learned neural nets 5 years ago, and then didn't do anything since, I would be useless today, because that technology has changed a lot. So I call it a skills treadmill. And I've focused on staying relevant by kind of leaning into areas that have a steep barrier to entry, where I can fall back on my soft skills and my problem solving skills and my deep mathematics knowledge. Handling the bad times, at Chevron, there were lots of downturns and reorgs or layoffs. It was awful. Didn't know how that was ever going to end. And so that took some work. And then maintaining a work-life balance. I've got 2 kids. I want to be there for them and be healthy and have fun outside and live my life. So just kind of always being vigilant and not working too much. I don't check my email outside of our office hours. I think a lot of people do. I think that's kind of where the world wants you to go, but I draw a hard line. And I have to say that luckily my partner contributes 50-50 or better in all life responsibilities. So he's with the kids and making dinner right now because it's 6:30 in Alaska. So I have to say thank you to that. And I wouldn't be able to have a good career if I didn't have that kind of support at home. So, this is most of what I have to talk about. And just some final takeaways are that as a scientist, you have a lot of useful, relevant skills. And so, you can choose to go deep in a single specialty or go broad and bridge a variety of disciplines, or you can do both over time. Careers can be quite long. So if you choose to go broad, remember that many of your skills will translate. It might seem scary to be switching and doing different things, but a lot of it will really translate and you'll be pleasantly surprised. Being able to communicate what you know and why it's relevant will really pay dividends. And then just a final plug, based on everything everyone told me when I was trying to get a job and what I've seen myself, being good at software or data analysis can't hurt. But that's all I have to talk about. Are there any questions?
Audrey, that was fantastic. Yes, there's quite a lively discussion going on in the chat, and yeah, there are a bunch of questions. And let me switch my camera on to be a little more sociable. My first question is, despite the fact that my boss is listening, would you consider being my manager? Well, jokes apart, yeah, so let me try and go through the questions one by one, but first I'll try and summarize a little bit some of the things that stood out to me, if that start some more discussion on questions. I loved your comment about how when you were working in the rescue coordination center, there were long periods of boredom followed by sheer panic. Yeah, that's a situation in which I think not a whole lot of people have been. And your advice about nobody loves you like you love you, and that really stands out to me. So that's great. Yeah, so I'll get to the questions then. So here's one from Mike Barlow, who is my boss, who says, well, so in Houston, in the oil and gas industry, it's well known for a level of chauvinism, and at a tech company and a European company like Siemens, was it a different environment? What do you have to say about that? Was there a difference between geoscience and oil and gas and tech?
Yeah, I think part of Siemens, so Siemens is huge, and the part of Siemens that I was in was relatively small, and the office was very small. So for the most part, the people that I worked with were just amazingly smart. A PhD was the barrier to entry. They were very smart. They were very nice. And in a way, kind of more humble, I think, than what I saw in oil and gas and what I see at Google. There was, though, a fair amount of chauvinism in some of the people that I ultimately might have needed to interact with, where, just a few people I went to meet at times just had no time to even learn my name. And I was like, okay, I'm never going to be judged to be on their level. And this isn't my forever home. And so that is why I stayed there for not that long, because I just thought I'm never going to be quite, respected or able to have the kind of career I want here.
I see. So it's like, you'd want to be the guru, but there seems to be like a ceiling towards, being that guru.
Yes.
Okay. Here's another question. So I like the idea of a bottom-up pipeline driving, but presumably someone at the top still has to decide what takes priority. So then how do you, in a company like Google, decide what is the best idea for the company? Yeah.
I don't know if this is acknowledged much outside of Google, but within Google, they describe it as a slime mold. So
say again?
they call it a slime mold. So it's like kind of self-organizing, and so I think, you know, a lot of things happen at a very low level, and it probably comes down to the individual person who's got an idea and their charisma, and whether they can convince people to join them, because it's other individuals at a lower level that might be joining them, or they may need to convince some managers and stuff as well. And then I think where the top-down part comes is maybe when it's time to, like, after something's been launched, and then they decide whether they want to continue to support it or make it bigger or better. I think that's more when the top-down stuff comes.
Cool, thanks. Here's a question from Phil Wynn. Throughout your journey, what is something you never thought would be relevant in your early career, but has remained relevant today?
Oh, let's see. You know, when I think the checklists, like when I was in command post school, the very first thing they did is they gave us this binder with like 50 checklists. And there was a checklist if there was an in-flight emergency. There was a checklist if, like, there's a movie called Broken Arrow where I think a nuclear missile or something is stolen. There was a checklist for that. There's a checklist for if there's lightning strike on a building. And so seeing how to kind of break apart like a high level thing into like, who might care about this and why, and how does it affect me, I think has been the most important thing. And it oddly applies to software engineering and tech.
Yeah, checklists are, yes. I think for various things in life, you know, I think we do much better if we use them. I hear in surgery as well, once people have started using checklists, as in, yeah, the outcomes have been far better. So that's yeah, nice. I see that there's lots of comments about work-life balance and how you know, it's important to have one, because you're right, that's the way the world is going. And so I'm glad that you're able to sort of push back against that and give us the courage to do the same. Because, you know, once we see a bunch of behaviors that we'd like to do, but we don't see other people, you know, engage in those behaviors, I think a lot of us are hesitant to do that, like push back and say, no, I don't think I'm going to answer your emails after 7 p.m. But I think if we see people in positions of responsibility or people that are respected do that, then it's sort of, you know, we do as our leaders do, or we do as well-respected people in our professional communities do, or, you know, outside as well. And so, yeah, so that's a great example you're setting there. Many of the women geoscientists I see over here are saying some of the experiences that you've described are exactly as you know, they see it as well. And it's great to see that you've been able to overcome them. Yeah, and so it's just been great. And so I think there's you know, very little questioning. There's a lot of appreciation of your talk. I think it's been a breath of fresh air. I see a question from Negin. Were there any challenges where you had to deal with self-doubt, and what helped you the most in such a situation?
Okay, I will say all the time, self-doubt. You know, there's like, what is it, imposter syndrome. It's very real. And I think the more you know, the more it hits you, because, you know, for example, I know a lot about some things, and I know enough to know that I don't know everything. And so even when I might be the expert in a room on a certain topic, there's always that niggling doubt that like, I didn't take quite enough classes on this. I could know more. There's a, you know, so just kind of understanding that and like backing away and you know, kind of looking at what I do know related to what other people know. And I think one thing about myself is that if you ask me a question and I don't know, or if I'm at a talk and I don't understand something, I'm really clear to say, I don't understand that. Can you explain it? And I think a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people will pretend they know that. So when I'm starting to feel the self-doubt, then I kind of remember that, like that I'm really upfront about what I don't know, but other people aren't. And so it helps me realize that, you know, some people might just seem confident and be bluffing, and really I earned my way into this room. I have important things to say, and yeah, so there's been a lot of self-doubt. And in addition to the self-doubt, like technically there was a lot of self-doubt just about like company culture, and am I in the right spot, and like how do I navigate this world. And so Anand knows a lot about that kind of thing, because I think I leaned on him a fair amount when we were at Chevron together. So yes, self-doubt all the time. I think just, recognizing like your own accomplishments and how far you've come, and then kind of trying to see other people as humans and understand that they might be putting up a facade is kind of an important thing.
Yeah, I can't begin to stress the importance of that. But we're all humans, and despite the face that we present to the world, it's important to keep that in mind for ourselves as well as the people we interact with. And yes, you were also an extremely supportive coworker, so I think it went both ways. So but thanks for that. Yeah, so I think that brings us to the the end of our questions. And Mike says, well, thanks, Audrey, fantastic talk. Yes, we do have Audrey's permission to record this, and this will be uploaded to YouTube. And I'm sure this will be one of our most highly viewed talks, because I think you provided some really sage advice to everybody. So thank you for that. And sorry to take your time away from your husband and kids, because I know that it's nearly 7 p.m. now for you. So yeah, so thank you for your time, and yes, look forward to catching up later. And thank you everybody for joining in and engaging in a lively chat. And until next time, bye bye.